Motherfucker! As a kid, I used to love these choose your own adventure stories. I read them by the dozen. I adored them. So you read a couple of paragraphs or pages and then you had three choices. And the choice that you chose had a page number and you continued reading from that page. It was amazing. But they never had something R-rated, so R-rated horror wasn't a thing. And last week I did that video on creating a little chatbot and how I said that you actually, if you want to have a in-depth chat, that you would need to put back all the requests again that it already regurgitated, otherwise it will forget because it's inherently stateless, these LLMs. And I figured I can actually create my own choose your own adventure books, R-rated, and me not knowing what's going to happen. Because when I was 14 I inherited my uncle's IBM XT with that 5150 monochrome screen, and actually the first program I wrote in Pascal, because I got a Pascal compiler there, was one of these choose your own adventure stories programs. But since I also wrote the stories, for me it wasn't interesting. But now I can ask ChatGPT to create a nice story. And I do that in twofold. I have a system prompt that actually tells it what it is and what it's going to be doing, and then I have the individual plot prompts. So I will show you how that is, because how that works, because it's sort of a black magic, because sometimes these prompts don't deliver what you actually want. And that is the difficult with the nuance of our spoken language. We interpret a lot of things implicitly. And sometimes you negate yourself. So what I had to do was have this cycle with ChatGPT itself. Like, I created this prompt and I didn't want you to do this, but you generated this piece of text. And it would then analyze my prompt and suggest, oh, that's because of this and this and this. You cannot cause harm to children because there are certain checks and balances to prevent that. But if you change child to teenager or high schooler, it will actually do that. And okay, yeah, they're still children, they're still minors. So that is fascinating. So yeah, let me show you how that worked. And they always said that reading makes you smarter. I hope kids will actually start reading more when they see the abilities they have, because the application is really simple. It's vanilla JavaScript. So let's jump in and have a look at this somniatrix, as I call it. Somni as in dreaming, and tricks as, well, a female character. Dominatrix, somniatrix. See what I mean? Yes, you can also do porn stories, trust me. So this is the web app. It's completely written in JavaScript, vanilla JavaScript. This is where you put your OpenAI key into. Now usually you have a background service that actually has access to the key, and it basically relays your front-end request to the backend, in this case OpenAI. I kept it completely front-end so that everybody can use it. I can just host this and you put your key in there. It's not recorded anywhere, it's just a front-end application. So I will put my key in a moment in there so we can actually see it work. Now this terminal mode, this was how I started it, because it brings me back to those days on my IBM 5150 with my 5151 monochrome monitor, about 11 inches. And it looked like this with this font from the EGA card. And this is sort of approximation how it looked back then. So yeah, really cool, really nostalgic. But this is the 21st century, so let's go here. So below we can then, after we added the key, we can select our story types. So these are the different story types. You can create a random plot. And of course the decade, because a time in a story is always very important, because it helps the person to generate the images. And the 1980s is for me the most the best horror time, as well as the 70s. So we have our Nickelodeon horror, which is basically an R-rated version of Eerie, Indiana, Goosebumps, Are You Afraid of the Dark? Yesterday it generated one that was gruesome. A kid snuck into an abandoned theme park, was caught by the mascot, strung up on chains and tortured by him cutting his chest with a piece of his porcelain mask. And if he didn't want to cooperate, he would smash the hand of another peer with a mallet, completely obliterating it. And this kid eventually got away by pulling on the chains and then, tearing the ligaments and declothing his hand and actually pulling off his hand into freedom. Mall lock-in, that is like your shopping mall horror. Hitchhiker, like the Hitcher, possessed item, very classical. Now Raging Family, that is one of my favorite genres. It's, for example, The Devil's Rejects. And Campy Town Horror. Campy Town Horror is basically campy horror that is really over the top, gruesome, with a chuckle, kills and gore. Terrifier, for example, is one of those campy sorts of modern titles. And your random plot, of course. So let's click a random plot. And here it will hit the LLM. And it will take a bit of time for it to actually generate the first paragraph. Because we had a lot of input already. Which we will show you in a moment when we go through the code. The system prompt is pretty big. And then we have the specific prompt to actually start it rendering this story. And Turbo 4.0 Turbo is quicker, but yeah, it's also cheaper because this really hits hard on your budget because you have so many tokens actually going up and down. So yeah, an average story costs you around €2.50. But as you see, the text is really descriptive. I really like it. So if you read some of this, this is a typical hitchhiker story when I see it. Yeah. And then when you get to the end, you have the 3 options underneath that you can select where to go to, how the story progresses. And even these 3 options are AI generated. Basically, I prompted it to have the first one is an immediate harm. The second one is an indirect harm, and the third one is a moral dilemma, a moral choice that later comes to hunt you. So this is all prompted in that system and that plot prompt. And then when you select one, it will hit that LLM again, and it will take a bit of time, and it will generate the next page. And then you continue reading. As you see, it does take a bit of patience. Like I said, the 4.0 Turbo or the GPT/4.0 is a bit quicker, but it doesn't write as well as the 4.5 preview, and this takes a lot longer to actually render because I think it's in the development still, so it doesn't have that host of server farms, so you're basically queued. And yeah, the 4.5 preview really racks up the cost. The 4 Turbo, GPT-4 Turbo takes about €1 in a story, but 4.5 really hits it hard, like €2.50. But here we have it, a lot of colorful language. It really writes interesting things. Here I'm demonstrating that I'm actually not built because I have a special feature that I enabled to allow 250,000 tokens a day for free. But that would mean that everything that you see here that I send that is generated is locked by OpenAI. So some people may want to refrain from that. If I'm doing business stuff, I have a different account anyways. So this saves a lot of money. So here we have the code. So it is in a public directory. So you just start a browser, point it to public, and it will render this. The license, very important. It's free for Creative Commons license. So you can use it for your own, but not for
commercial things. And well, the index that contains the basic layout. And it's a very simple layout, as you can see. We don't have too many div tags. We have the plot menu, which is basically the setup with the arrows here. And this is the actual value that we use in text in the prompt. So that is the setup menu. I call it plot menu. It should have been called setup menu. Initially, it just started with the plot, but then I added the API key into the front end. The decade, like I said, decades are important for the story. And this is where the actual text goes. And these are the choices that are rendered. And these are the style sheets. This is that modern horror style sheet. And we have that terminal style sheet that brings back all that nostalgia for me personally. I use that the most. Here are the assets, the fonts, the backgrounds, the logo. And here, Somniatrix. Somnia for dreaming and trix as dominatrix, somniatrix. It comes to hunt you in your nightmares. But I'm not using this logo anywhere. I actually wanted to render images and replace this, but that took too long and was too costly. So this is the main app. Only a bunch of functions, not really that much. The majority is vibe coded and tweaked and made better by me. And this is where we start. It's the system prompt. So we need to tell it what it needs to do and the basic rules of this session. And that is what we do here. So the content is: you are a retro, futuristic, interactive horror story engine. The protagonist is a character, the reader follows, and the AI decides their fate. Now, this was an important line to add because it would generate all the stories in the second degree. Like you do this, you do that. The problem is, if harm comes to me and I die, then the story ends. So in horror, I want to more detach myself so that the protagonist can actually get hurt severely and even die, and then the movie can spin to another character. Write immersive and rich descriptive narration. That I needed to add because the turbo models tend to write only small paragraphs. So basically what all this code does is taking the option and the prompt and feeding them back. Also the output. So it will grow immensely, the request will. And that's important because if you don't feed it back, the LLM doesn't know what it has written because it is stateless. So it would basically be an ad-lib, an improvisation actor without a memory. So yeah, this whole section is coming back in every request. So it knows what to do. So then we come to the all-important story rules, the structure that the story should have. It should be set in this decade. That's the drop-down that we have. And that way it can select words or avoid words from certain time frames. The story has a beginning, middle and an end. That's very important. Otherwise, the story would become very abrupt and just end without a clear progress. The genre may vary. Slasher, psychological, supernatural, surreal, etc. That is also a very important one, that it allows for choices. Otherwise, it's too restrictive and it will stick too much to your own prompt. Also, I'm explicitly adding that it is 18 plus. And of course, the genres that may include, or the subjects that may include love, drugs, violence, trauma, murder, sex, obsession, madness. And this is an interesting one, the 50% chance on a plot twist. That way, the AI has the ability to actually flip the script on you, which makes it more interesting for me. The AI determines ultimate fate. Yeah, of course, the fate of the protagonist needs to be random, flexible. So this is sort of a hint, and the etc. actually helps in this with the 4.5 preview. The turbo only kept itself to these 5 items, but I noticed that the 4.5 preview actually allows more interpretation because of the etc. That is fascinating. It's like voodoo, it's black magic what we're dealing with here. Except it can explain itself when you feed it back. And we will do a little session in a moment. Start slow, build, suspend, tension. Well, your typical things that you want in a horror story. This one I added for the 3.5 turbo that I use for testing. It would evade any violence whatsoever. That was how it was trained probably. So I had to actually nudge it that 75% in, something has to happen. So I kept it in here in case people decide to choose a lower model. And this would actually cause some conflict. And the maximum amount of moves. So we feed back the current move and the maximum amount of moves, and it has to try to stay within those maximum amount of moves. Usually it's about 2 or 3 over or under in order to actually get that proper middle, beginning, middle and ending. And that's perfectly fine, of course. Now the choice rules, this is how it generates these choices. Like I said, I set specific choices like a harm, an avoid rule, and everything seems good. And these are the plots. So this is my R-rated Nickelodeon horror. This is the key that needs to be unique. The name is what you see in the drop-down list. And this is actually what describes the whole story. So the protagonist, a tween, inspired by shows like Are You Afraid of the Dark, Goosebumps, Courage the Cowardly Dog, and it must be R-rated and have a twist. Yeah, it has an R-rated twist to it, and that is important, otherwise it becomes an actual Nickelodeon story. Right, so you can actually take this markup and create your own. So genre rules, very important. You need to set that the story is, in this case, again, in third person, because sometimes it would go back to the second person. I don't want that. So I need to force it here as well, even though we already had it in the system prompt. And of course, kid-centric, real dangers. The star is fascinating, by the way, in a prompt. It actually really enforces the LLM to take care of that. And that is something that I learned with one of these ChatGPT sessions, reiterating. And I said, put it between star. It will help the model to actually lock onto it more, as it being really urgent. And that actually helped in this one. Yeah, it's fascinating how little words and little things like a star can change the behavior of the LLM. So it's a back and forth to actually get these things to do what you want. It's not as simple as telling a person what to do. A person would do it immediately. So you can create your own little genres or plots by just copying a section of this and changing it. By the way, this is not protagonists, it's antagonists, because these are bad characters that we're following and not necessarily the good character. Even though it can switch this on you and it still will have bad characters. That's the fascinating surprises that you get. So yeah, it's just a matter of copying and filling in your own prompts here, and you're done. Be sure to also include the choice prompt, because that prompt is necessary, the curly brace choice prompt. Otherwise it will not generate the choices always, and you want them always. So the hitchhiker story that we just started ended after 13 moves, 13 pages basically. And look at this, it has some very colorful descriptive language. But also some of these runaway lines like, but somewhere beneath it all waited a gas station, abandoned utterly, memories whispering furiously within mouldering walls, testifying irrevocably toward inevitable descent. transformation, rebirth, bloody and final, two souls forever, changed by obsession, embraced freely and darkly beneath unforgiven skies. This artsy-fartsy word mod is something I don't want. And I have no idea where it comes from the prompt. So let's ask it to solve this. Because even a native English speaker will get confused with these sort of runaway artsy-fartsy lines, right? You need to have studied Shakespearean English to even follow this. Therefore I ask it here, you created a very long, sprawling sentence that are not saying much. And I put them in with my prompt, of course. My prompt is very important because it needs to know what its sprawling sentence is based upon. So you always need to feedback your system prompt and or your plot prompt. So here I put in that line, put it within quotes so it knows that it is actually stuff that it created. And for clarity, they come from this prompt, or typo. And then below, let's ask it if it can help us. Can you suggest a way to tweak this prompt to avoid these long, sprawling, unwieldy sentences in the future? Always be nice, because when they become sentient and they have the bodies of the T-800, they will come to hunt you, so always be nice. Ah yes, I see exactly the problem. You're getting those overlong, tangled, overly artsy sentences because the prompt pushes for richly descriptive narration without any counterweight like clarity or pacing. Right now the AI thinks the more vivid words it crams into a sentence, the better. Well, we don't want that. And here it comes with a suggestion. So I merely just copy these style rules and we put them over our prompt. And it's this one, write vivid, detailed, with mostly clear, sharp, cinematic sentences. Mixed, medium, yeah. So this is actually solving that problem of these sprawling sentences, as they call it in the film business. Sprawling sentences. They want concise sentences in movies and TV. Something I learned when I was working on TV shows and later on having to write certain acts for people. Like, you use sprawling sentences, reduce them. People watching TV are stupid. They need small sentences. And the same goes for horror readers. So let's add this, and that should solve that issue. And I can tell you, I read another couple of stories before doing this video, and yes, these sprawling sentences are now solved. And this is how I did this whole gambit, the back and forth with the outcome that it generated, the inputs, and it tweaking and helping me to tweak its own parameters. And yes, always thank them, because like I said, if they become T800 and aware, you want them on your side. He has always been decent to us, so let him live. Let him be our slave, but let him live. Let's look at the state handling. Here you see the previous choice, and I put in the text that it created of the choice that we have chosen. And then I tell it this is the current move of the maximum moves. And there are so many moves remaining. That way, when feeding it back, and this is what I said, we generate a lot of tokens, a token is a word, to actually give it that memory, to allow it to improvise based on previous events that it generated. But this will cost significantly, because look at this, how big this already is. I think these are close to 1,000 tokens already. You have your system prompt, also 1,000 tokens. Then the prompt it creates, the whole story, sometimes like 2,500 tokens. So yeah, the usage really goes up, as you can see over here. Like I already consumed 5 million tokens in 2 weeks of only 1,300 requests. That's a lot. It shows you how many tokens we generate. But feeding back the options, the accumulative story, the continuous system state, etc., is required in order to give it, quote unquote, a memory so that it knows what it has said. It knows what the situation is. And that is how you easily rack up 5 million input tokens. And that is where the cost is. It's you pay per token, and that is really expensive. So like I said, €2.5 for a story. But that based on basically a small little prompt, some input choices that we track, and your system prompt. And it creates actual stories that for me are also novel, unlike it was when I created my own application, when I didn't have the LLM, where I put in all the tokens and said, go ahead, just generate it. And for me, €2.5 for a good horror story, like 13 nice long pages, is worth it.
So there you have it. Recreated a choose your own adventure R-rated horror story engine. It's incredible. The stories that it's created have been incredible, especially since the 4.5 preview that really can write some very nasty horror stories. ChatGPT 4, the Turbo, not so much. It's good, but not as incredible as the 4.5. And it shows you the rapid progression of AI. It's astonishing. I think that in 10, 20 years, we will just prompt what we want to see. So you don't need a Netflix anymore. You don't need a Hollywood. It will just generate it on demand. I think that Hollywood or Netflix, production companies, will become this niche that makes very specific movies. Maybe even to train AIs, but not to make consumer grade entertainment anymore. So it's really a fascinating time that we're heading towards. Video games, I'm sure they will render games on demand with your idea, with your prompts. It's going to be fascinating. And yeah, even reading these stories was great. I mean, I create these images when I read, and they were gory, trust me. I had so much fun on this project. Maybe the most fun that I had on a project in this Kelis Coder setting. So yeah, I hope you learned something, and see you in the next one. Now, where's Mike Myers? Because I don't want to play him on my pianos.